Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Medianet's webinar, where we are going to do a deep dive into the 2024 Media Landscape Report. And what a great next 30-40 minutes we have lined up for you. I'm Amrita Sidhu. I'm the Managing Director of Medianet, and I have the pleasure to host this webinar along with a few very, very special guests I will introduce you to very shortly. How the next 30 to 40 minutes is going to run after I do those introductions is my colleague Mercedes will give us all a bit of a refresher of the key takeaways and data points from this year's landscape report, and then we will have an open and expansive conversation. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, so please have a think of those and pop them into the question box, the chat box that you would be seeing on your screen right now. I'd love to hear your comments or your thoughts or your questions to our panelists. So without further ado, let me introduce them to you. What a lineup we have. First up, Phoebe Netto, who is the founder and managing director of Pure Public Relations. Phoebe founded Pure Public Relations over 14 years ago, and in that period has established an organisation with a proven track record for securing excellent media coverage and managing issues in a very impressive way. She has a really great focus on outcomes, which I absolutely love, rather than just output. And you may have seen her in many umbrella events or read her industry, in industry publications, read her opinion pieces. A true PR and comms industry leader. Welcome, Phoebe. Thank you for being here. Please say hello to our audience and, add anything introduction-wise in your own words.
Thank you. Really happy to be here because I really enjoyed looking at this report. I talk a lot about media relations best practice and found that this report was just a gold mine of insights, and it has really thorough data to back up a lot of the best practice and what media have been banging their head against a wall about all this time. There's data now to back up what they've been saying.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phoebe. And from one industry star to another, our second guest today is Andrew Jaspin, Editor-in-Chief, Director and Founder of 360 Info. I personally don't think Andrew needs any introduction, as his experience really speaks for itself. He's founder of The Conversation, Australia's largest independent news commentary site. He's also the former editor-in-chief of The Age and The Sunday Age, with a mile-long list of incredible media roles across the UK too. What a privilege to have you here, Andrew. Please say hello to our audience as well and add something if you'd like by way of an intro.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm not going to repeat what Phoebe said because I totally agree. It's a really good report that you've done. I don't know at some stage, Amrita, if I could just mention what I currently do, because I think you kindly mentioned what I've done in the past. But I'm currently the editor-in-chief and founder of a news service called 360 Info, which is like a features wire agency, but I can talk about that later. Anyway, thank you very much. Delighted to be with you and Mercedes.
Thank you, Andrew. And Mercedes, let me please introduce you as well. Mercedes Karen, the head of marketing at Medianet, a really stellar B2B brand marketer and PR professional who's worked across a range of traditional and digital media companies over the last decade plus. Take it from me, she's an absolute authority on content-led social media platform engagement as well. Mercedes, please say hi as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amrita, for the wonderful introduction. Yes, I'm a marketer, but I'm also very passionate about media and journalism. So we love bringing this kind of content to our audience, and I really look forward to the discussion with these two powerhouses.
Excellent, as do I. So before we get to that discussion, as I mentioned at the start, Mercedes is going to give us all a quick recap, an executive summary of the key findings of the report. I'm sure you have all read the report in detail, page by page. just in case you might have skimmed a few of those pages, Mercedes will help refresh our memories about the key data points, which then the four of us can do a bit of a deep dive on. And just a reminder, keep those questions coming through if you have any. Mercedes, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amrita. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I will give you like a 5-minute summary because I really want, to give space for the discussion. So this report was conducted based on a survey conducted in September and October last year. In terms of, we wanted to focus a lot on AI this time around. Because as you all know, AI kind of took the world by storm. So I'll now, if we have the slides up, so I'll let you know who responded to the survey. We had about 844 journalists responding, with majority of them working in digital journalism, followed by print, radio, TV, and podcasting. In terms of how much they earn, about 31% said they earn $100,000 or more per year, but the most common pay bracket was between $80,000 and $100,000 mark. And most of them, 57% of them identified as female, 41% of them identified as male, and 1% identified as non-binary. As I said before, big focus on AI this time around. It was very interesting to see that almost 80% of respondents are concerned about the impacts that generative AI or large language models could have on the overall integrity of or the quality of journalism. But it was also quite surprising to see that about a quarter only of respondents had actually used AI personally. 74% had not used it at all. And despite that low usage, there's still a big concern around it. In fact, 36% of journalists believe generative AI is a threat to public interest journalism. 67% believe that it could potentially replace aspects of their jobs. And not a very big figure at 12%, but given that it's early days, it's interesting to see as well that 12% know someone who has lost work or has lost work themselves in 2023 due to AI. Now, there will be a lot of discussion about this, I'm sure, in a few minutes, so I will move on now. In terms of pay and employment, money remains the biggest challenge for journalists, and it has for about 3 years. So it was about 18% for 18% of respondents in 2021, is now the top challenge for 43% of journalists. So that is a very significant increase. Perhaps then it's not surprising that for 67% of journalists, they feel that they are underpaid. And 45% of journalists said that their role has changed in some way in 2023, whether they are moving to another organization or within their own organization. But there's still a lot of movement within the industry that is important to keep an eye on. So this time around, we also wanted to understand what is that keeps journalists motivated, despite of all the challenges that we have discussed, in the past, and even out of this survey in terms of money, pay, burnout, and all those things. So we asked them what they wish we knew, and also what is their top motivation. The question about what they wish we knew was an open question, and despite of that, in their own words, journalists still said a similar thing. About 50% of them said that they wish the public understood that their work is driven by genuinely good intentions and ethics to report accurately and fairly without a hidden agenda. And for 80% of them, the main motivation is to report on stories due to inform the public, as opposed to, for example, building their own profile. So that was very interesting, but there's definitely a sense that journalists are misunderstood, or they feel misunderstood. Now, in terms of story sources, There's not a lot of movement from last year's report. Still, industry leaders are the top source for journalists, followed by press releases, search engines, and social media. But we do have AI now as another source that we didn't have before. Very significant yet, but yeah, it remains kind of the same as the year before. And now, in terms of how journalists use press releases, for just over half of them, they write or produce the story using information from the release, just some information. About 30% said they use releases as background information only, and 13% would use most of the release for the story. Okay, so now we can move on to how to build better relationships. So that's another very interesting part of the report. We asked them, how do they think it would be best for PR professionals to build relationships with them? For most of them, the best way is by providing story or interview exclusives and by sending personalized pitches. So nothing, they really want their pitches to be relevant to them. And this is something that we always talk about at Medianet. The other two top ways would be just by sending press releases and contacting only when necessary. As you can see, only about 30% say they want regular contact over email or phone. So something definitely to take note of there. And we asked them if they would be more or less likely to publish a story if it has already been published. 47% say they would be less likely, but really it's about 50-50 there, and it kind of depends on the story. So I'm going to now wrap up with social media. It's been a lot of change in the social media world, and there was a lot of interest around this year. I'll give you a little bit of context and a refresher. So last year, Elon Musk took over Twitter, then made a whole bunch of changes, and then he dropped the brand and changed it into X, which I'm sure a lot of us had many opinions about. And then at the same time, Meta launched the platform called Threads. For many, there was hope that it could be kind of a replacement of Twitter, especially journalists world. So has that happened? Let's take a look. Facebook still remains as the top social media platform used by journalists, but here's where the change came. Now it's followed by Instagram and LinkedIn, and X or Twitter is now the fourth most used social media platform, when it used to be the second most used. So you can see there the breakdown. Since 2019, it was always the second, but it has dropped now from 69% of journalists using Twitter or X to now being just 58%. TikTok, on the other hand, has been steadily climbing up the ladder quite consistently. And it doesn't look like Threads has overtaken Twitter or replaced it at all, with only 13% of journalists using it professionally. But 96% of journalists did say that they use social media in their media work, and 73% of them use social media as a source specifically. So that's really a very important aspect that PR professionals should keep in mind. So that is enough from me. I will now pass on to Amrita and kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes, for running us all through that data and giving us a bit of a refresh. So Andrew, Phoebe, Mercedes, I'd like to start the panel discussion with one of the most important findings from the 2024 report, and also one of the hottest topics for any industry, I feel, at the moment, let alone the media and the communications industry, and that is AI. There's a strong sentiment coming through the data and the results that journalists perceive AI as a threat, a bit of a threat to both public interest journalism and also a threat to their roles. Phoebe, let's start with you, please, if that's okay. We heard just then from Mercedes that 67% of the respondents said that they believed AI and large language models could potentially replace aspects of their role. And yet 74% of journos said they had not used generative AI or large language models in their work. So what's your perspective on that particular survey finding?
At the moment, this iteration of AI is a threat to only mediocre writing or writing that is considered low value. So it doesn't replace excellent writing. It doesn't understand nuance, doesn't understand context or cultural differences. It can't push back or question an approach, but it can be a very useful tool if you learn how to use LLMs well. And over time, journalists are going to experiment because they are so time poor. Telstra's creative agency were experimenting with the use of AI with really clever prompts, and they recorded their experiments. They found that humans could come up with 17 email marketing subject lines in an hour, ready for their client's consideration. So they were polished and ready, 17 in an hour. A well-trained AI tool could come up with 112 subject lines in the same time frame, and then the copywriter could very quickly choose the best 17. So you can see the difference in time that it makes if you train it well and you don't have it replacing a whole role. I think PRs need to be careful, because if they're creating bland content, well, you could get that generated by AI just as easily or easier. So PRs just need to justify their existence in the journalist's inbox even more, because why would you choose PR content over AI content if their content is not particularly newsworthy or interesting?
Yeah, great perspective there, Phoebe. Thank you. And I love that anecdote about Telstra and, I guess, the volume of email subjects they were able to produce. And I think that really speaks to that data point around it replacing part of the role, right? Rather than all of the role. Andrew, coming to you now, let's talk about the public interest journalism aspect of AI. So we had nearly 80%, so 4 out of 5 of those surveyed, saying that they were concerned about the impact generative AI could have on the overall integrity of journalism, and nearly 40% saw it as a direct threat to that integrity. A quote from one of the respondents that's highlighted in the survey, which I think really speaks to this, is, and I quote, "AI deals only with knowledge that already exists online. It cannot investigate, scrutinize, and provide fresh information." And yet, conversely, there's this quote: "The alleged threat has been massively overblown and is only a danger to lazy journalists." So what do you currently see as the role of AI for journos, and is this public interest threat real?
Thank you. Look, there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing to say is that we've got to remember that ChatGPT, for example, is only a couple of years old. OpenAI really got going in 2019 or so. So this is all terribly new, is my first point. Secondly is your respondents, the majority have not even used it. So it's based on not even using it and making certain assumptions. And my third point is that it's a little bit of a Wild West out there. And like all Wild West, what I mean by that is totally unregulated. And there are all sorts of things going on. New York Times, for example, is suing OpenAI because they're using their content without authority. There are all sorts of really bad things going on, and governments, meaning regulators, are very slow because they're still trying to understand what's what, and they're trying to figure out how they can control. There are certain controls that can go in, and big tech needs to play its part. The only problem is, as I'm sure you followed, is the likes of Twitter, or now X, then Meta, and also YouTube, have sacked 40,000 people globally who are working on what was called the security and safety side of their services. So that's why it's unregulated, and it's a real problem. Now, having said all that, we at 360 Info use it in a number of ways, and I can go into that. But Just bear in mind, every media company used to have a library, and that library was stocked with people who did clippings largely. And those clippings were very, very limited. They all lost their jobs. They've all gone. Then people moved on to using Google search, which was useful in a certain way. But this is just building on it. These are just more tools coming along. From my point of view, I actually think with certain rules around how we use large language models, ChatGPT, and there's a whole bunch of others, that it is all down to whether we're in control or not. And my fear is when there isn't a human interaction in any of that, and we'll never know if something is being curated or overseen by humans, or whether it's just content which is spewing out. There are lots of organizations now that are starting to use AI-generated content. News Corp has said will be doing more. In the US, there's a magazine, Sports Illustrated, uses it massively. In this country, there are lots of outlets using it. And the problem is we don't know. So what this comes down to is disclosure and transparency about how we use it. And that's the most important thing, because we need to win the trust of readers who can make choices about whether they want to read content generated by largely large language systems, which are just trawling over so much. I mean, it's billions of inputs go into this. And I should say that most of these are pre-trained. So they're programmed to be pre-trained so that they know the rules when we search for something. Secondly, a lot of them are actually learning on the job, and that means that those LLMs are actually learning. And when we correct them, because quite often we say that's wrong, they learn from that, and that improves what they do. So it's a really curious new tool, but I do think, broadly speaking, it can. And I'll just finish on this. We use it to do large-scale horizon scanning on stories. So we'll just ask, what is known on a certain subject, and it does a first round for us, which we then we've got our own researchers will more deeply research into, and our editors will then make fundamental choices about what to use, who to commission, etc. The second area we're using it for is translation. So we have a big footprint in Indonesia, and more of our outlets are asking for content in Bahasa. So what happens is our editors use ChatGPT, and it does about 80% of the job, does a really good job. So what that does is it saves them time, and time, every newsroom is resource poor. Mm-hmm. So if it saves 80% of their time translating, then they spend only 20% of their time actually fine-tuning it, polishing it, making sure that it's, in language which is suitable for the marketplace and colloquial and all that kind of stuff. So, there are lots of ways it can help and be a real assistant, as it were, to journalists.
Thank you, Andrew, for breaking that down, both from the threat perspective, but I think also sharing with our audience how you're using it at the moment at 360 Info. Mercedes, coming to you now, but if I get a good follow-up question there from Andrew, just sharing how he was using it. I know you are the leader of a very active, marketing and comms team, and you do quite a bit of experimentation with AI. Could you give us some insight into how you're using it at Medianet, and whether you, putting you on the spot here a little bit, believe it's going to replace any kind of ongoing functions of your team?
Well, we are very open to experimentation, and that is definitely driven by leadership. We are welcome to try new things. So we definitely experiment. We use it a lot for inspiration in many cases, where you have a writer's block and you just want to get a few options, but nothing ever goes out without editing and adding that human layer to it. I also have found it very useful to analyze data. If I want to know, how many of my followers fall under this industry or that industry or that kind of thing, it has proven to be quite useful in that way. Creatively, the team uses it for things like video editing, captioning, and tasks that would normally take a lot of time. So it's been quite useful in that area. The benefit for us is definitely the time saving aspect, like Phoebe was mentioning earlier. I don't see it replacing any functions of the team, because it always needs that human component, like overseeing or editing. It's never quite there. It's never quite perfect. But yeah, that is our experience so far.
Thank you. I have a great question from one of the audience, which I'm going to toss in now on this topic. And I think it's a question that just warrants a yes or no answer. It's a great one, picks up a little bit on what you said there, Andrew, about disclosure. So the question is, should AI be given a byline when it's used in articles so the audience knows? Instinctive answer panel, yes or no? What do you think? Phoebe, I'm starting with you.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, Andrew.
Disclosure at the bottom of the article, not as a byline.
Okay, great perspective. Love it. Mercedes.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be some disclosure. We do it with some images at the moment where it says that it's been generated by AI. So yeah, I would say a disclaimer is necessary.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Just toss that one in there, but it was a great and very timely question. Now, look, we could probably spend all of this webinar talking about AI, but there are a few other things I know the four of us are keen to unpack. So I'm going to move on, and, time permitting, towards the end, we can circle back based on a few other of the audience questions as well. Let's talk about one of the other findings that I found quite interesting and valuable. And that's when it came to the topic around employment and work, how much money continues to be and is growing to be a challenge for our journos and our media organisations, right? So 43% this year said money was their greatest challenge, higher than 2022, as Mercedes showed us when it was 36%. And it's been the biggest challenge for journos now over the last 4 years. You've got 67% of respondents feeling like they're underpaid. You know, Andrew, you mentioned to me, I know when we were chatting in the lead up, that you were aware of some salaries for some roles not having increased, in the last 7-10 years. How do you feel the money factor is impacting the media landscape, either at the organizational or the individual level?
Yes. So what I mentioned to you was when I was running The Age, when I looked at the salaries there, they're roughly speaking the same as they are now. So when you look at your salary, the results from your salary survey, if you just looked at print, I guess, more than TV and whatever else, looking at that, the majority of the staff then were under 100,000. I think the number over 100,000 has slightly increased, but it's not really changed. And that's in sort of, 14 years or something. So I really worry about how journalists can survive on that, particularly with cost of living pressures, mortgage pressures. I think there's a lot of stress out there amongst, younger journalists. The one thing I should say, however, is that, and by the way, your survey, when I looked at TV and other things, the other area I'm concerned about is a lot of in the same way as the business model of print and digital operations is being squeezed and will continue to be squeezed. And if I can just remind everyone that of all the advertising spent in Australia, 82% goes to Google and Facebook. So what's left goes to, the players out there. So just bear in mind that's happening there, but also the squeeze on all the free-to-air TV, from the streaming services will increase. There's big changes coming forward. So what you've got is a lack of resources, meaning money, and a lack of resources, meaning people, to actually do these jobs. And in a weak market, guess what happens? Pay gets weak as well, because, the people running these organizations are having to say, well, we can't afford to pay more than that, and we need to keep salaries low. And those people on higher salaries tend to be let go, and you hire cheaper and younger journalists. So it's a really difficult situation for media companies. And by the way, I think we need to accept that it is, if you want to run news media organizations, they are costly, and you've got less income coming in, and still you've got to try and find good journalists. The one thing I would say, and we can go on to this separately, is that sadly the ecosystem we live in rewards and incentivizes controversy and bad behavior. So it's an attention economy that we're in, where it's about how many clicks you get. And this game is, clicks are gamed. So within newsrooms, they reward those journalists who get more clicks and more engagement. And they don't penalize those who don't get them, but they try and move them across to work in areas where they will get more engagement or clicks. So it's really a dangerous territory that we're in. Sorry, I've maybe overspoken, but I hope that answers.
No, all good, Andrew. And I think we might come back to that point around, click-worthy content, because I can see one or two questions about that coming in. So we might come back to that. So keep that thought alive for us, please. Look, we know from the data in previous media landscape reports, and Medianet has been producing this for a number of years now, that more than a third of PR professionals have previously worked as a journalist or a media professional. And the most common reason for switching when we asked them was better lifestyle and pay, with pay being on average more than 30% higher than those pay figures Mercedes presented at the start. Phoebe, I know you've hired journalists to be part of your team over the years. Does the pay challenge resonate for you? And do you see any other factors that are influencing journos to move into PR?
It's the two that were in the survey, money and lifestyle. I mean, journalists' pay reflects the decreasing revenues of media organizations in general. Even the publishers who are being really creative with new revenue streams are still struggling to pay journalists anywhere near the equivalent salary of related professions like PR or content marketing. And then also, PR can be a really high pressure environment, depending on the type of PR you focus on and the sector you're in. But does that compare to the pressure of needing to publish a certain number of stories before 11 a.m. or needing to have a full schedule of guests booked by 8 a.m.? Some people would say no, not everyone, but some would. And so that can also be a factor.
Yeah, I really like that kind of lifestyle burnout, was a big trend last year as well in our report. So, it's really interesting that you highlight that aspect as well. So thank you for that. There's a very set of interesting insights coming out of this year's report as well on the perception of journalism and the role of public interest journalism. And I love this quote, "We don't make up stories. Everything is verified, and we don't try and make something out of a story that is not true. We respond to what the audience wants, not the other way around." Andrew, I'm coming at you with this one. 4 out of 5 journos said that their main motivation to report on stories is informing the public. 70% of respondents said there's an increase in disinformation and fake news is a threat to public interest responsibility, to their public interest responsibility. In your experience, Andrew, does the average comms and PR professional have enough understanding of this aspect of the journalism role?
Look, I think there are certain expectations there. But the problem is a lot of newsrooms are unable to fulfill them in the way they used to do it. So, as we've said, with newsrooms being time poor, resource poor, whereas once upon a time journalists would go out and actually meet people, meet contacts, sort of boots on the ground, burn up shoe leather, all those kind of cliches, they now are told to do, instead of 1 story a day, to do maybe 5 or if not more a day. So it's all done very quickly just to get the stories out the door. And there isn't a huge amount of work around some of that. And that leads to what I call shallower reporting. And I think readers can actually see through all of that, that the fuller, deeper service that some of them are used to is no longer there. Some outlets, by the way, have comparatively deep resources and can do a better job on that front. The second thing is that there's some bad behaviour which goes on. I mean, the recent one was with the Victorian MP, she had her picture used by 9 TV, which was doctored, or they said they used AI to generate a different kind of image of her. And that was really bad behavior, and an example of why the public, I think, increasingly question the media. They also question it because of some of the bad behavior, which is largely in the UK around phone hacking. And I only mention that again now because last week or the week before, you probably know that Prince Harry won a big victory there over the Mirror Group newspapers for industrial phone hacking. But that's just the start. He's now going for the Daily Mail, and then he's going again for the Sun. And this is going on right now in the UK. But there are bad behaviors that go on as well in this country. And the reason for it is driven by the fact that a lot of newsrooms are told, I don't care how you get the story, just get the story. And not only that, get the story first, because that means we've got an exclusive. So those kind of pressures that are put on journalists are leading to people taking shortcuts as to how they can just get a story out there without the detailed work, which would actually encourage readers to believe that what is written is well researched, well thought through, taken lots of different points of view, and therefore is more reliable. I like to use the word reliable than trustworthy to actually use. So there are a lot of pressures which are leading to, I think, at times, shortcuts, let's call it that, which is undermining the public's sort of feeling of trust and credibility in the way in which the media operates.
Thank you, Andrew. Really great perspective there. You mentioned something there about how to get the story. And Phoebe, I want to move on to talk about the role of social media now, because that's clearly becoming one of the ways our journalists, our media community is getting the story, right? 96% of respondents say they use social media in their work, and more than 70% of it are using it as a source for stories. It's actually in one of the top 4 sources of stories for journos, which just, separately is kind of like, I feel a bit mind-blowing for me to actually say that sentence. But if, Phoebe, if journos are on social media actively looking for stories, how would you guide organisations to leverage that? Should we be kind of meeting and pitching to journos on these platforms? And I think a kind of a related point to that is a question from one of our audience about ways to build relationships with journalists, effective relationships with journalists. So I'm just wondering also, do you think social is a platform to build effective relationships, and should we be pitching and meeting journos on social?
Absolutely. If you can be the most helpful PR they deal with, then you're more likely to get what you want out of the relationship as well. I see media call-outs on LinkedIn almost every day of the week. But you can only see those if you're connected with them on LinkedIn, and you should aim to only be connected with them if you're already connecting with them before adding them on LinkedIn, so it's a meaningful exchange. But that's a great place to start. And I find that when there's a call out on X or LinkedIn, the journalist's preference is to receive an email in response rather than pitching them on the social channel itself, because email is still the preferred method to receive pitches rather than text, phone, social, WhatsApp. And so my advice would be to ask the media that you're interacting with what their preferences are. And if you use Medianet, you can often see their communication preferences listed on their profile. But definitely call-outs are being posted almost every day. Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, they're more used for identifying trends or finding case studies. So there's not a huge role for PRs there. But LinkedIn and X, PR should definitely be connecting with their journo buddies and making new journo mates on there so that they can be the first and most helpful when there is that call out.
Hot tip there from Phoebe. I hope everyone made a little calendar block in their schedule today to start doing some connections on LinkedIn and X if you haven't already been doing so. So thank you.
Giving myself more competition to pitch against them.
Yeah, you might as well, but we appreciate the best practice share, Phoebe. Thank you. Mercedes, you've got some experience in this space as well. Can you talk us through some of the ways that we can repurpose communications content, right? You've got these teams out there, they're producing so much great content. How could they repurpose it? Things like the press release, so it's not more work, into formats that are more suitable for social. Sorry.
Yeah, so we love repurposing at Medianet. We are a small team, so we like working smart. We do take advantage of a lot of content that not only the marketing team puts together, but also the editorial and the research team. My tip would be that you want to give your content as a wider reach as you possibly can, but that doesn't mean you put the link to your press release on LinkedIn. You have to adapt the content to match that platform. So if you have a press release, take that content out and turn it into something that works well, for example, for LinkedIn, a video, a carousel, that kind of thing. So that's really something that we do a lot of, transforming an asset into another asset that will be suitable for consumption across many different platforms.
Thank you, Mercedes. Andrew, the data on the usage of Twitter/X, the drop-off there, quite the material drop-off. Did that surprise you?
Oh, not one bit. I mean, sort of underlying this whole discussion is about integrity and trust, credibility and all that. And when you have what's been done to Twitter, and it's now called X, I mean, it is a big X to a lot of people, as in cross off. And I just know so many journalists just have fled from it. We use, I have to say, an interesting, Phoebe, what you were saying, we find the best engagement is through LinkedIn, and that's really because it's talking to the kind of people we need to talk to. And we're a B2B service, we're a wire agency, so we're not really talking to readers as such. We're looking for professionals, to either journalists to work with, or researchers and that kind of area. So we have a sort of a site that only media people can go to if they register, and I can give the details of that. And then 3 days later, we post everything on a public site, just so you don't need to register to access that. And on that site, we do use a limited amount of Facebook and YouTube and a couple of other ways of getting our content out. But broadly speaking, it's not an area we massively focus on because we're a B2B play.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Questions are coming in here thick and fast from our audience, which is really, really great. I want to pivot a little bit to building effective relationships between newsrooms and PRs, and really creating that kind of mutual bridge, as they were, be it in-house or agency side. So we know industry and professional contacts are a top story source, followed by press release and social. We covered all of that in the data at the start, and press releases, I guess, remain a crucial part of the communication strategy for an organisation and brand. And personal pictures has been identified as a leading way to build media relationships. So Phoebe, do you agree on the importance of traditional pitching, and what guidance could you give some of our audience on developing those relationships? And as one of our questioners has pointed out very rightly so as well, does that approach need to change as with the decline of younger audiences accessing traditional media outlets? So I guess a bit of a double barrel question there. Your pitching guidance, the importance of the traditional pitch, but how do we handle the changing audience as well?
Everything in the report says avoid the spray and pray approach, where you just blast out a generic press release. Everyone gets the same email, and you just hope that it's relevant to a portion of the respondents, and you hope that some of them are interested and available. That's just rarely effective and not great for building your relationships with journalists. And repeatedly in the report, it's favouring personalised pitches, which we should all know anyway. It's interesting, it talked about how almost half of the respondents were less likely to cover a story that had already been covered, yet 81% of journalists are using media releases as story content. So that means when you're sending a press release out, you've got to know that around half of them may not want to cover it because they know they're not the only one to have received the media release. So you really need to think about what the goal is. Is the story you're wanting to get across needing to have a certain treatment by maybe one big outlet that handles it with care or has a big reach or is going to give it a certain level of depth or empathy? Or would a large distribution have a good approach for you? But even then, you should be looking for a tailored pitch and making sure that you've got the most important information up front. And that's not just for your media release. You should be sending it with a pitch that are at a really quick glance lets them know the key point of the press release, but also what you're offering and why they might care. So what assets are available? Is there someone available for interview, and when are they available? Are there additional assets like case studies, background information, interesting data? Try and do as much of the job for them, because we know they're time poor. They're more likely to give you their time if you can save them some. So that's always been best practice for PR, but it's necessary more now than ever, given the pressures that they've got on their job, and honestly, the amount of pitches that they're receiving as well. Also worth keeping in mind is that there's a lot of movement in journalism. So 45% of them said that their job or role had changed in 2023. So you need to have really strong individual contacts so that when they move, they will hopefully take you as a contact with them as they move. So getting to know them as an individual journalist. What do they like? What are their preferences? How do they prefer to report or cover a story? Do they prefer exclusivity, or do they not care? How do they define exclusivity? We really need to know a lot of information about each journalist, but it pays off because if they're coming to PRs for contacts and for story ideas or material, you need to be the PR that they choose, not an alternative PR person. So you need to create preference for yourself by making their life easier and respecting their time and justifying yourself in their inbox.
Thank you, Phoebe. A few really good points there. There is a lot of movement. So, if you need to stay on track of it, as you're saying, you need to do that. That's something that Medianet, of course, we track as much of the media movements around the country as we possibly can, and we pride ourselves on that. But you're absolutely right about this balance between, targeted relationship building versus a media release that you also need to send out to a wider audience, and getting that balance right for the right kind of outcome that you're looking for is absolutely spot on. I'm going to pick up on a really interesting theme that's coming out of 3 or 4 different questions that are coming in from the audience. So thank you everyone for that. And there's a few people that have asked a vein of this kind of question. So I'll see if I can kind of join it all together, right? And this is bringing back that content credibility point of view, where maybe perhaps there's a perception editors are being pushed or are pushing themselves for paid content. Where's the public interest when it's click-based public interest versus, let's call it integrity-based public interest? Is there a kind of an element of confusion there that's happening? There's a lot of questions along these lines kind of coming in. So I guess to try and summarize that is, what is the feeling amongst the panelists? This pressure for clicks, views, paid content versus quality editorial content that informs the audience. Phoebe, I'm coming to you here first.
It's a reality, because the clickbait articles, they work. People are clicking them, and I think what the key is to rather than say they shouldn't exist, because that's just not possible anymore. Especially when the lines between types of media have blurred, where you've got people curating their own content and considering themselves a form of journalist without training or backing of advertisers or platforms. You just need to be really transparent about what outlet you are, what type of an outlet are you. Can people expect thorough reporting from your outlet? Then stick to that. If not, just own it. We are bringing you, celebrity news or clickbait or light touch reporting. Just be really clear and consistent. I think the problem is when there's a lack of consistency. So you expect a certain outlet to be of a certain reputation, and then you feel led astray when one journalist from that outlet does something contrary to that, or there's a slippery slope of decline over time. I think that's where trust is broken.
Thanks, Phoebe. Mercedes, any perspective from you on this particular one?
I so agree with Phoebe. It comes down to trust. So I agree. If that's what you do, stay in that lane, and then expectations will not be broken. And that's what it comes down to.
Thank you,
I'm
Andrew.
not expecting Four Corners to do a Daily Mail. I'm not expecting a Daily Mail. So stay in your lane.
Yeah, well, stay true to your brand identity, right? Stay true to your identity as a news organization and what you stand for and the audience that you serve as well, right? And I think that's a principle that actually just applies to, I think, all organizations. Andrew, I'm sure you have a perspective on this one.
Yeah, it's kind of a huge topic, but broadly speaking, the term that's used for this, there's a brilliant professor of news and journalism at Monash called Emma Bryant. She says it's the attention economy. She just constantly says it's all about winning attention. And winning attention means, getting more people to like you, to follow you, to click on you, and all that kind of stuff. And sadly, as I said earlier, the market is broadly, I guess, neutral. It just rewards the most outrageous stories there are. The more outrageous, the more controversial, and also sometimes it rewards straightforward lies. I mean, in America, Trump and his followers still believe the election was stolen from them, and they just repeat that over and over again. And it's apparently over half the population, well, 70% of Republicans all believe the election was stolen. So the facts are not there, the evidence is not there, but it's still believed. And the more you peddle those kind of nonsense, the more that people seem to click on it. So it's a really difficult area. And my view is, in terms of where we go with this, there has to be industry regulation by big tech. We've got to bring that in. We've got to bring in more training for journalists. And by the way, not just for journalists, I believe in media literacy or civic literacy classes going on for the wider public, but also for those at school. I mean, starting really quite young. And there needs to be something else, which is trust indicators, which tell the reader before they even click on an outlet or a story that this story has been, or the outlet has been checked as a reliable provider of content. Now, there are lots of those kind of checks. We belong to one called NewsGuard, which is it's called a trust ratings agency in America. I think you guys know about it as well. And they do an independent audit across 9 different areas of how you work, which, by the way, in our case, took a long time. Well, they're just very thorough. But we ended up getting 100 out of 100. Now, yeah, that's great. But the key thing is that these trust ratings need to go onto content, so that when you search for something, it comes up with NewsGuard. It's basically saying this provider of information or content has actually gone along with and complied with very strict rules about how they perform and behave. So these kind of rules apply to everything in our life. I mean, all of us go through checks. If you're working with children, there are checks, police checks. In all sorts of areas, before you get jobs, you have to demonstrate that you've got, the right qualifications and all that. There are checks and balances, codes of conduct, codes of behavior, and all of that needs, I think, to be built in to the way in which people sort of view content, but before they even click on it, they are aware that there has been somebody checking over that outlet. Now, that's all very well for rational people, because we all four are rational, but there are other people there who just don't believe in, facts. And that's a real problem we face, not just in Australia, but globally. People who just don't believe, as I said before, that an election was won by Biden and lost by Trump, or climate change, or there's a whole range of different issues. So the waters are really muddied right now, which allows the bad players, the people who promote disinformation, misinformation, fake news, all that kind of stuff, they're all out there, and everything is up for grabs until we get more regulation around what is reliable and what isn't.
Yeah, I think that disinformation, misinformation definitely came through as well. And there's a decent section of the report that covers that. Phoebe, Andrew, Mercedes, we could keep chatting for another hour, but it has been just a touch under an hour. And so we're already over by a few minutes, but our audience has hung in there, which is amazing. And I cannot tell you how many questions kind of came through. I think even if I hadn't asked you a single question to get us going, we wouldn't have gotten through all the questions that we got. So thank you everyone for your engagement. We will do our best on some of them to connect you up afterwards, or to try and get responses to your questions. So thank you for your inputs, Andrew, Phoebe, Mercedes. It's been absolutely brilliant. I really encourage everyone watching. Phoebe, I'm going to take your tip here as well. Connect with Andrew, connect with Phoebe, with Mercedes, with myself. I can certainly tell you from my own personal experience, Andrew and Phoebe are an incredible wealth of knowledge. I'm sure they would love to hear from you. I'm sure they would love to tell you a little bit more about their organizations and what they do, because they're really, interesting and informative and innovative organizations that they're involved in. So please do reach out to them. As a follow-up to this webinar, everyone that watched it live or, is watching it in replay, you will receive a copy of this webinar, a whole bunch of resources, which includes the actual media landscape report, some blog content, and some other important, useful information as well, which you can see on your screen there. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you again to everyone that watched and participated and put some really fantastic questions forward. And I hope to see you again on the next Medianet webinar. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.